After this, Jesus went to the other side. That's how our gospel reading begins. You see, for the past chapter or so, Jesus had been spending his time in Jerusalem, where he had healed a man who had been lame for at least 38 years. It only took 13 verses for him to heal the man, but Jesus is forced to justify the healing for the next 34 verses, debating with the local religious authorities who felt he shouldn't be doing this sort of thing on the Sabbath. There was a time and a place for everything, and the Sabbath was reserved only for worshiping God. He was breaking the law, for goodness sake. And so, after this, Jesus went to the other side. And the other side for Jesus was more than just the other side of the Sea of Galilee, as our text describes it. It was more than just a getaway to blow off some steam. Going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee was like going to the other side of the tracks. Apparently, Jesus had had his fill of debating Scripture with religious authorities when he made the decision to go to the other side. But news of his great deeds of power followed him wherever he went, and so did the crowds of people. They were desperate people who lived day to day, barely getting by. There was very little hope for these folks, and there were absolutely no guarantees. It must have been a frightening sight for the disciples. Here Jesus and they were stuck on the wrong side of the tracks, and as far as the eye could see, there were desperate crowds making their way towards them. And to make matters even worse, they were on a mountain with no place to retreat. And that's when Jesus came up with the bright idea to feed them. "They're bound to be hungry. I know I sure am," Jesus said, "so let's give them something to eat." Now, you and I have to understand that food for these people meant something completely different than it means for you and me. You and I eat at least 3 meals a day, and in between those meals we keep the hunger pains away with anything from chips, popcorn, and cookies if you're like most Americans, to fruit and nuts if you're trying to be healthy. In first century Palestine, if you were rich, you ate 2 meals each day. But these people making their way up the mountain weren't rich. They were peasants, and for them, a small bit of bread was the difference between starvation and surviving one more day. Food for these folks was hope. And so Jesus said, let's feed them. Let's give them some hope. I have to admit, I would have been right there with Philip and Andrew. I would have been pointing out our limited resources. There's just not enough money in the budget, Jesus, to feed all these people. Not enough money, and there never will be. And our gifts in kind only amount to a couple of sardines and 5 moldy dinner rolls. We don't have what it takes to feed them, Jesus. We've got to turn them away. If you're like most people who live in 21st century America, you can look at this story as a story about feeding a bunch of hungry people some fish and bread. But if you look at it from the perspective of a first century Palestinian, it's a story about feeding them hope, something that was in awful short supply at the time. Offering up hope despite your limitations. But you don't really have to be a first century Palestinian to know what that's like, do you? The parents who look into their newborn baby's eyes and wonder if they have what it takes to raise this child who depends upon them for everything know what it must have been like for the disciples to look into the faces of that hungry and needy crowd. And the school counselor who looks into the frightened and confused eyes of the student who walks into her office knows what it's like. She knows if she has what it she wonders if she has what it takes to undo the damage that classroom bullying has done to the student spirit. And so she also knows what the disciples must have felt as they looked into the faces of the desperate crowds. and the small inner city congregation of 25 or 30 people who find themselves faced with issues of hunger and homelessness and poverty and HIV and spiritually abused LGBT folks, all while trying to pay the salary of a pastor who isn't sure if he has what it takes to do the job. That congregation knows what it's like when the disciples compared their limited resources against so many people. No, I don't think it's a story about feeding the people some bread and fish. I think it's a story about feeding them hope. Because we all need hope. And it's up to us. It's up to you and me to feed hope to our corner of the world, even when we don't feel like we've got enough for ourselves, even when we don't think we're cut out for the job. Our instinct may be to run the other way or to explain why we can't help, but Jesus says differently. He says, make the people sit down. Sit down. You over there, can you scoot over just a bit to make room for the new folks? Sit down. You don't have to go anywhere. You're welcome here. Sit down. We don't have much, but what we have we'll share with you. So just make yourself comfortable and sit down. Fight the impulse to turn them away. Wrestle with the fear that lurks within you. The fear that there won't be enough for yourself if you share what you have with others. If you've got hope to share, I promise you'll still have some after you share it with someone else. Who knows? A miracle may happen, and you might have even more than you started out with. So put aside your fears. Don't turn your back on the person, and just tell them to sit down for a while. Then give thanks. That's the next thing Jesus did. And by doing so, by giving thanks, he brought God into the equation. When God's in the picture, it's no longer about me. I'm no longer on my own. When I give thanks for the resources I have been blessed with, and when I give thanks for the opportunity to share those resources, then I am acknowledging that I am standing on holy ground. I am standing in a sacred space and time that is ripe for a miracle. The miraculous transformation that happens when hope is shared with another person. And then just do the footwork. Do it, even if you think you will fail, because that's what faith is. I'm not so sure that faith is believing you will succeed against all odds, but rather, I wonder if faith is doing it even when you're pretty sure that there's no chance of success. Doing it because that's your calling. Doing what you can and leaving the results up to God. I wonder if faith is not raising that child the best you can despite personal misgivings in your own abilities. I wonder if it's not listening to and affirming that student even when it feels like you're not doing nearly enough. I wonder if it's not ministering to the spiritually and physically abused without measuring your success against other churches. I wonder if faith is not offering up hope to someone in whatever way you can, even when you feel like you're not qualified for the job, even when you have so very little for yourself. After the disciples distributed the fish and bread, they discovered something miraculous. They discovered that there was enough leftovers for 12 baskets, a basket for each of them. They had started out the day without a bite to eat, but finished off the day with a full basket of leftovers. I wonder what happened to those leftovers. I wonder if they gorged themselves, or if they learned the lesson that you've got to give it away to keep it. I wonder if they shared their baskets full of hope with even more people. Harvey Milk, a gay politician and activist, gave a speech in 1978, less than 1 year before he was gunned down. It's a speech that's just as relevant today as it was then. In it, he said, "I can't forget the looks on faces of people who've lost hope. Be they gay, be they seniors, be they blacks looking for an almost impossible job, be they Latins trying to explain their problems and aspirations in a tongue that's foreign to them. I personally will never forget that people are more important than buildings." And the young gay people in the Altoona, Pennsylvanias, and the Richmond, Minnesotas, who are coming out and hear Anita Bryant on television and her story, the only thing they have to look forward to is hope. And you have to give them hope. Hope for a better world. Hope for a better tomorrow. Hope for a better place to come to if the pressures at home are too great. Hope that all will be all right. Without hope, not only gays, but the blacks, the seniors, the handicapped, the us's will give up. He concluded his speech by telling the crowds, "You and you and you got to give them hope." May we embrace the call of God to give them something to satisfy their hunger pains, and may it be hope. Amen.